Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's Libertarian Angle. The show here on the internet, as most of you know, that brings you the principled, uncompromising case for libertarianism, the free society. If you're new to FFF, come and visit us at fff.org. We've got about 31 years of principled, uncompromising articles on libertarianism. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Subscribe to our FFF Daily, that's free, and also to our monthly journal, Future of Freedom. And if you're not a supporter, financial supporter of FFF, now would be a great time to do so. And you can make a tax-deductible donation at fff.org. We're putting together a great civil liberties conference for the fall. We could really use your financial support to help put it together. So thank you very much for considering to do so. I want to talk to you today about this criminal indictment that the state of New York has brought against the Trump organization as well as Trump's financial officer, Allen Weiselberg. This thing is so filled with corruption and hypocrisy that it almost defies credulity. Let me say first of all that they're not interested in getting a conviction here of Weisellberg. They're not trying to seek some kind of justice with respect to this man. They have one aim in mind, and that is to secure his testimony as a way to get Donald Trump. That's what this is all about. That what they're going to do is they're going to use these little tax violations that they've uncovered as a way to get him convicted of tax fraud, and then they're going to slap him with a high sentence. It doesn't have to be extremely high. The man's 73 years old. Let's say they slap him with a 25-year sentence, which is essentially a life sentence given his age. And then they're going to squeeze him. And they're going to say, if you turn state's evidence against Donald Trump and give us all his secrets that we can get him on, we'll let you off the hook. We'll give you probation. We'll let you spend the rest of your life with your family. That's what this is all about. They're using him to squeeze him with this ridiculous indictment as a way to get Donald Trump. Now, they may do it before they convict him, going over there and offering him sweetheart deals or promises not to go after his wife. That's another favorite tactic they use. That if you don't want us to go after your wife, go ahead and plead guilty and cooperate with us and help us get Donald Trump. That's what this is all about. It goes to the whole corrupt aspect of this indictment. Now, what they're going after him on is so ridiculous. I mean, it's these perks that the Trump organization supposedly gave to Weisselberg. I forget what they are. Various perks, rent here or children's tuition there or whatever, and he supposedly didn't declare that as his income. Whoop-de-doo. Oh, man. I mean, whenever this happens, and it pervades the business world, this type of stuff. They always just settle it. When they uncover it, they settle it with a civil fine, make restitution. But here, they've made an exception. They're going after this guy criminally because that's the only way to squeeze him to get Trump. You see, if they go after him civilly, as they always do in these kind of cases, when they catch somebody doing these technical violations of the tax laws, they go after him civilly, fine him, make him, whatever. But it's no jail time, in other words. But here, oh no, we're going to make an exception with Weisselberg because that, again, is the way they get to Donald Trump. They squeeze him in order to get him. I mean, well, in a larger context, we got to look at this whole ridiculous tax system. I mean, there's a reason why you have all these tax provisions, and tax deductions, and the IRS code is like a foot thick and whatever. Because the more complex they can make it, then they keep everybody in line this way. That, in other words, there's always something that they can get somebody on with these tax laws. There's no question about it. I mean, the state of New York could go after any business or any executive in any business in New York and just dig around, and they will find tax violations. That's the advantage of this type of income tax system, that it's truly a tyrannical system because it gives the state so much leeway in determining who to go after. And the effect of this is terribly a terrible suppressant on terms of like things like free speech. Because if you know that the state can come after you at any time it wants, like it's doing with Weisellberg, you tend to stay in line. You know, if you're a business executive, you don't want this type of thing. You don't want to get indicted. You don't want to get audited by the IRS or by the New York authorities. So you tend to seal your lips when it comes to government wrongdoing, like wrongdoing invading Afghanistan or Iraq, or things like the drug war and stuff. You don't want to challenge government at a fundamental level because of the potential for retaliation. And that's how the regulated, taxed society really is it trumps the First Amendment. Okay, you know, they can go out and say, oh, and you know, when they preach to, you know, Russia or China, and they say, oh, in our country, people have the right of free speech. Well, you know, in a technical sense, that's correct. But in a practical sense, it's not, because people are going to narrow what their criticism of government might otherwise be if they know the state can come after them whenever it wants. And it really can. When you've got this kind of regulated system, tax system, and then you've also got the NSA spying on people, recording their phone calls, monitoring their website visits, and so forth. So if business executives are involved in some kind of improper personal activity, an affair or whatever, they're not going to know whether the government has that information or not, and they're going to constrain themselves with respect to their criticism of government to ensure against any potential disclosure of their secrets. And of course, the model for this was FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who the FBI building is named after. I mean, they still honor this guy. This guy was a serial blackmailer. He would acquire secrets on people by spying on them, keep files on them, not as a way to destroy them, but as a way to keep them in line. That if anybody in Congress, for example, that he had a secret file on, even hinted at criticizing his tenure in office or the operations at the FBI, he would, you know, pull out his file and say, hey, we're protecting your secrets here, and we're going to continue protecting your secrets. And the person would get the message that if you don't want these secrets disclosed, keep your mouth shut. Well, it's the same thing with respect to the threat of a tax audit, an indictment like this. People are going to adjust their conduct to avoid this type of thing taking place. And make no mistake about it, that you know, this criminal justice system is often used as a way of political retaliation, which is obviously is here. I mean, they're not going after Weisellberg because they feel that he's committed some type of injustice here. I mean, of course, people on the left are making that case. Oh, this is a terrible thing, tax fraud and whatever. Oh, come on. I mean, like I say, you could audit every single business in the state of New York, and I guarantee you will find tax violations. And they can go in there and make the big case, oh, it's systemic, it's been going on for years, and so forth. The same nonsense that they're saying about the Trump organization in Weisellberg. And let me emphasize here that you don't have to be a fan of Donald Trump to recognize this. I mean, I'm a libertarian, you know. I wasn't any great fan of Trump's statist policies, but right is right, and what they're doing here is absolutely wrong. It's wrong-headed. It's morally wrong. It's really an abuse of the tax system. Now, but let's put things into an even bigger context. Why does there have to be an income tax at all? You know, see, the founding fathers of this country understood this. That this is why that America lived without an income tax for more than 100 years. I mean, imagine living in a society in which people are free to keep everything they earn. I mean, that's phenomenal. And that's not the only thing that characterized the 19th century and showed how different the American people were from Americans today. This was a society for more than 100 years that had no income tax. And none of the things that the income tax today funds, like no Social Security, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no mandatory charity at all. Charity was considered to be a totally voluntary act rather than forced and coerced like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid are. And along with welfare, education grants, farm subsidies, foreign aid to dictators, drug war, gun control, farm subsidies, no CIA, no massive military-industrial complex, no empire of domestic military bases or foreign military bases, no Pentagon, no CIA, no NSA, no immigration controls, no Homeland Security, no war on terrorism, no Cold War. I mean, it was a totally different kind of society. Now, let me make it clear. Whenever I talk about the positive side of the 19th century, I get criticized by the reform element in the libertarian movement saying, oh, Jacob, you forgot to condemn slavery. Okay, I'm condemning slavery. I mean, the fact that anybody has to condemn slavery, I've never met anybody that defends slavery. But the reform element says that we need to defend slavery when we're talking about we need to oppose slavery when we're talking about the 19th century. Okay, so I oppose slavery. But there were positive sides of this century that are worth emphasizing because they show what's possible. They didn't want an income tax. In fact, if you examine the Constitution, it says that they would have indirect taxes, but not direct taxes. Now, even indirect taxes, people were leery about. If you go back, for example, to the Revolutionary War, which is kind of an interesting thing, given that we just experienced the 4th of July, that the people who talk about the 4th of July and praise it and so forth, they talk about the Boston Tea Party, for example. Oh, wasn't this a great thing that those patriots just dumped that tea in the water, that they were evading the tea tax, and they praise them for evading the tea tax, or the smugglers that were bringing goods in without paying the import duties on them, or the Stamp Act, and they'll say, oh, weren't these courageous patriots, and they'll puff out their chests and smile and say, oh, wasn't it great what they were doing? But then today, when people are, not reporting all their perks that they get, oh my gosh, this is terrible, Jacob. This is terrible. They should be, supporting the welfare warfare state. How can our government be, waging these forever wars and providing all this welfare if people are not going to report their perks, There's a lot of hypocrisy going into this thing. But when the Revolutionary War starts, the colonists, the British subjects, and they were British. We often forget that on the 4th of July. That we think that they were fighting some foreign army. They weren't. They were fighting their own army. They were not supporting the troops. They were shooting at their troops because the troops were doing bad things to them, including trying to take their guns away, which is kind of another lesson about the 4th of July, how lots of statists support the 4th of July and favor gun control. When the 4th of July was precipitated by the attempt by people's own government to confiscate their guns. But in any event, people didn't like taxation. Now, the common myth is that, they were just opposed to taxation because they didn't have representation. Well, I guarantee you that if King George had said, well, we're going to give you some representation, send some colonists over here to participate in the parliamentary debates and votes and so forth, they wouldn't have liked those taxes any more than they did. And the proof of this is that they organized a governmental structure known as the Articles of Confederation. And under the Articles of Confederation, there was no power to tax for the federal government. I mean, it was the states which were looked upon as sovereign entities that were coming together and in this confederation, and part of this coming together was the structure of a federal government. But the federal government could not operate with taxation. Now, it was a federal government. It existed for more than 10 years or so, but always without taxation. And so that kind of reflects how people felt about taxation. They understood that this is a means of terrible tyranny. So when they're dumping the tea into the Boston Harbor, or they're opposing the Stamp Act and The other taxes that King George was doing is because they considered what he was doing tyrannical. But I mean, when you compare what King George was doing to British subjects in America to what the state of New York does to New York people, there's no comparison. I mean, the New York outfit with its tyrannical income tax, with all of its provisions that they use to go after people, is much worse than anything King George was doing with respect to taxation. So when the Constitution was calling the federal government into existence in 1791 or so, the American people were very leery because now the Constitution was calling into existence a different type of government. They figured that at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, they were just going to come up with some amendments to the articles which would make it work more efficiently. There had been trade wars between the states and things like that. So they thought, well, they're just going to amend it. Well, they didn't do that. They came up with a proposal for an entirely new governmental structure. And this was the federal government, which had significantly more powers than the federal government under the Articles, including the power to tax. And this concerned people because they understood what that meant. But they finally went along with the deal because they were persuaded that the Constitution was going to be a government of limited powers. You see, they didn't want a government of general powers as many Americans want today, or, a government that has the power to assassinate people and to torture people and indefinitely detain people and the power to seize their income, any percentage of their income that the government sets, or the power to take care of people. They didn't want any of this. That's why I say the 19th century was a society where there was no mandatory charity. There was no Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, farm subsidies, education grants, and then, of course, no foreign interventionism, no foreign wars, and so forth. Now, as I say, tragically and horrifically, that they had slavery, no question about that, and there were other violations. Women didn't have the right to vote and so forth. But in terms of economic liberty, I mean, they showed what's possible to achieve. And one of those was with respect to taxation. They said, we oppose any kind of direct taxation. So for 100 years or so, more than 100 years, there was no income taxation because they understood that a direct tax, like an income tax, is much more tyrannical than an indirect tax, like a sales tax. Now, obviously, with a sales tax, you still have force being implemented against a business collecting a sales tax. But it's not so intrusive, for example, against regular people that are out there, buying things. They pay the tax and they're gone, and the government's not there monitoring how much they were making. They don't have to file income tax returns showing the government how much they were making. So there was this sense of financial privacy, which is essential to a free society. I mean, our ancestors understood that if the government can pry into your financial affairs, or you have to report your financial affairs to the government, you're not living in a free society. And so people were, like I said, free to keep everything they earned. And they didn't have to, rush down to the post office on April 15th every year to get their income tax return on time. There was certainly no withholding because there was no income tax. People didn't have to keep track of their deductions or any of these things. And they didn't have to worry about, is this perk reportable? Is that perk reportable? They didn't have any of this nonsense because, again, there was no income tax for more than 100 years. And that's the way Americans wanted it. That's the way Americans liked it. And by the way, that was one of the principal reasons for the tremendous surge in economic prosperity throughout the 19th century. It started slowly because obviously there's a lot of poverty in 1791, early 1800s. But with each generation, people would save a portion of their income. And that savings would go into banks. Employers would go in there and borrow that money to purchase more productive tools and equipment that would make their employees more productive. And then that additional productivity would cause revenues to increase, which would then enable the employer to pay more money to his employees. Not out of the goodness of his heart, but because other businesses were doing very well too. So they would threaten to bid away employees. And so that's how wages were rising, through the process of competition between employers. But the only way that employers could pay higher wages is by increasing revenues, real revenues, not inflationary revenues. In fact, another big reason for the tremendous prosperity that was really manifesting itself in the late 1800s, early 1900s, along with inventions coming out every day. It was a very dynamic time in which to live. Was the fact that they had sound money. There was no Federal Reserve, which is an engine of monetary destruction. They didn't have fiat or paper money. The Constitution expressly provided for gold coins and silver coins, and expressly said that no state shall make anything but gold and silver legal tender. A totally different type of monetary system, and that contributed to this base of economic prosperity, along with no immigration controls. And people were flooding into America every day to participate in this system where a government didn't take care of people. And these were penniless people, many of whom couldn't speak English. And they were coming to a society where government couldn't take care of people. It was prohibited from doing so. It didn't even have the money to do so. A totally unique type of system, very, very unusual in world history. There's never been a society like it. And so you had this tremendous prosperity because of no income tax, because of sound money, because of this influx of labor, of people that wanting to work hard coming into America. I mean, you have this tremendous prosperity that's manifesting itself in the late 1800s, early 1900s. The standard of living in one 20-year period at least doubled. I mean, it was incredible. And then the change starts. The progressives start coming in, and a lot of them had studied in Germany, which was experimenting and advocating socialist concepts like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public schooling, and they started importing these ideas to America. And of course, the statists saw that there was this tremendous amount of wealth, and there was still poverty. But I mean, the standard of living of poor people compared to the rest of the world and compared to world history, I mean, it was incredible. I mean, the poor had this enormously higher standard of living in the United States. And many of the poor were going from rags to riches. Many of the multimillionaires had been poor. I mean, Americans really discovered the key to ending poverty was this system where government essentially is prohibited from taking care of the poor. And so it was incredible system, but you had these socialists that were now trying to change the direction. They saw this massive amount of wealth. They said, we want government to confiscate it. They don't realize that by confiscating the wealth, they're putting an end to this system. It's now going to move back in the old direction of ensuring poverty. But people are resistant at first. I mean, obviously, if you're living in a system where there's no income tax, where people are free to keep everything they earn, no mandatory charity, and the standard of living is soaring, why would you give that up for a welfare warfare state, which is what progressives were advocating? But so in 1913, you get the 16th Amendment, which eliminates this direct taxation provision, and so now that opened the floodgates to the federal income tax. And at the time that it was enacted, one of the arguments that the statists were using for enacting it is they said, oh, it's only going to be levied on the rich. That was the promise they made. But they didn't enshrine that in the amendment itself. They just said, believe us, trust us, that it'll only be levied on the rich, that the middle class and the poor never have to worry. Well, of course, that turned out to be a lie. I mean, today, everybody's besieged by the federal income tax, not just the rich. Middle class are the ones that are really funding the whole welfare warfare state. But the poor, too, pay a big price for this because you don't have that massive accumulation of savings and capital anymore that propel the higher standard of living. And you got the Federal Reserve at the same time in 1913. Then that sets the basis for what happens in the 30s with Franklin Roosevelt. The Federal Reserve had mismanaged this money supply in the 1920s. That gave rise to the stock market crash in 1929. And then the Roosevelt administration used that as the excuse for revolutionizing America's economic system and monetary system. Roosevelt confiscated everybody's gold. He nationalized it without even a constitutional amendment. He changed the entire constitutional order of gold coins and silver coins as the official money of the American people. I mean, we often hear that the gold standard was a system of paper money backed by gold. That's ridiculous. There was never such thing. There never was any paper money. Paper money was prohibited by the Constitution. There was gold coins and silver coins, and there were notes and bills that had been issued by the government, instruments of indebtedness. But everybody understood those were just instruments of indebtedness. They promised to pay gold coins and silver coins, which were the official money. Roosevelt, in one fell swoop, nationalized it all without even a constitutional amendment. He says that crises give him this dictatorial power, which, of course, was false. But then you've got the income tax that's now expanding, and Roosevelt uses this. I mean, now the floodgates are open. You've got paper money, which the government can print to its heart's content. You got the income tax, where the government can set the percentage to any extent it wants. And now the floodgates are open for the welfare state at first in the 30s, and then the warfare state that comes into existence in the next decade, to where we are today with this huge welfare warfare state, along with all the tyranny that comes with the tax system, a massive IRS code, all these provisions and ways for them to go after people the way they're going after Weisellberg and Trump. Perhaps the worst part of this whole thing, though, was the destruction of liberty in the sense of the relationship between the individual and the federal government. Because you see, prior to the enactment of the federal income tax, the individual was sovereign and supreme. I mean, that's what freedom is when the individual has sovereignty over his own life, where he's free to choose to live his life any way he wants, so long as his conduct is peaceful, it doesn't involve the initiation of force or fraud against others. And so the government in that kind of system is the servant. It truly is there to protect the exercise of individual sovereignty by individuals. Protect their exercise to make choices. Many times those choices might be unpopular, but that's the essence of freedom, the right to make unpopular choices, so long, again, that they don't involve the initiation of force or fraud. But the individual is sovereign in this kind of society. The government is subordinate. With the income tax, that relationship was inverted. The government became the sovereign. I mean, it's our master, and we are the servant. We are the serf in this welfare warfare state serfdom. There's no question about it. I mean, we exist to serve the state. From the day we're born, that's our goal in life. Our role is essentially like drones in a beehive, that we exist for the greater good of the hive. And that's the mindset of the welfare warfare state and those who advocate the welfare warfare state. So the government decides how much money we're going to be permitted to keep. Now, it doesn't appear that way because we get our paycheck, and then well, there's withholding, of course, and if we're short, we have to send them a check. And it looks like we're in charge of our money in this way, but that's just a facade. The fact is that since government has the authority to set the percentage, government's in charge. I mean, they could set it 90% and leaving us 10, or sometimes they'll be good to us and set it at 30%. But the point is, the government is in charge. They're the sovereign. They determine how much we're going to be permitted to keep, and it's really in the nature of an allowance. I've said before that the most honest kind of tax system here, the income tax system, is where the government just keeps everything we earn and then just sends us every month or so our allowance, because that's really the essence of what's happening with this kind of system. That the government is sovereign and supreme. We're the servant. We're the serf. We serve the greater good of the state. And that mindset then pervades the entire existence that we have as a nation and as individuals. For example, conscription, the draft, is just considered normal. The idea that the government can force people to go serve it. I mean, this is a bizarre system. It's aberrant. And there's people saying, oh, Jacob, we live in a free country. We live in a free country. notwithstanding the fact that the government can force anyone on a moment's notice to report to a military facility for training to be sent in some foreign war to fight and die. I mean, who is sovereign and supreme in that relationship? If the individual were sovereign and supreme, he could say, no, of course I'm not going to go at your orders. I'm sovereign and supreme in my existence here as a human being. But no, you see, so this mindset of who's in charge pervades not just the income tax system, it pervades other aspects of our relationship with the federal government as well. In order to achieve a truly free society, you got to get rid of this whole system. You've got to get rid of not just the income tax, which a lot of libertarians favor, but you got to get rid of this whole welfare warfare state system too, which libertarians are sometimes not very talkative about. They don't want to talk about getting rid of Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid and farm subsidies and education grants and foreign aid. At least some of them don't. But they go hand in hand. I mean, all these programs, welfare state programs, warfare state programs, the national security establishment, the giant military industrial complex, the NSA, the CIA, the forever wars, they're all funded with this income tax system. So you got to get rid of it all, and therefore you got to question it all. This is a good time to do some soul searching in this country. In the midst of this pandemic and crisis, that's a good time to do some soul searching. And you've got two conflicting visions here that we're faced with. One vision that was established by our 19th century ancestors, not disregarding slavery and the other violations of liberty, but looking at the positive thing that they accomplished, a society for more than 100 years with no income tax, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, gun control, immigration controls, drug war, on and on and on, versus this kind of system today where we live under a welfare warfare state serfdom, where the government is sovereign and supreme, where the government can go after people like Weisellberg and Trump whenever they want to, but just by digging through their financial records and finding these little technical income tax violations. And of course, mandatory charity, which destroys individual conscience, inhibits private charity. Totally different kind of vision over here that guides America. So this is the soul searching that we should engage in. Who was right here? And what do we do going forward? Do we go with the same type of system we have today, out of control federal spending and debt, inflation, forever wars, massive military involvement in our lives, intelligence involvement, CIA, massive tyranny in terms of the war on immigrants, the war on drugs, the war on poverty, the war on wealth, and the tyranny of this highly technical tax system? Or do we restore the good, positive founding principles of this country? Well, to me, the answer is a no-brainer. That's the Libertarian Angle for this week. Thank you for tuning in. And again, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Come to fff.org. Become a donor to the Future of Freedom Foundation. And thank you so much.